Would you have described her as a friend?
Yes, yeah. Yeah, very much so.
In addition to being a friend, Michael Yabsley also worked for Gina Rinehart. And he actually remembers planning the Wake Up Australia flight with her back in 1979. That was the extravagant birthday gift that Gina organised for Lang for his 70th birthday that you heard about in the last episode. Michael was actually meant to be on that flight as well, but he had to pull out.
Oh, well, she was furious.
What does a furious Gina Rinehart look like?
Very composed, and that melodic voice sort of goes up a few, what are they called, octaves or whatever it is, and she gets a very stern look on her face. I think I was always pretty right in saying that the higher the pitch got, the crankier she was.
Michael and Gina are no longer friends, but he does remember that time fondly.
It was a pretty close and happy sort of relationship. And so I saw a lot of her. You'd have to blot out the last 30 years and go back earlier than that. She loves having a nice time. She loves going out to dinner, loves being with, a small number of people who she can trust. And with Gina, trust is everything. I think she was probably weaned on the message by Lang that all of these journalists, all of these people who want to get close to you, they've got another agenda. And I'd say that became part of her DNA.
And for people who don't know Gina Rinehart personally in the way you have, what do you think is the most important thing to understand about what drives her?
Tenacity. She does not take a backward step. And that would be my one word description of the most important characteristic of her.
And that's not just in business, that's across all aspects of her life.
Yes, yeah, including her personal life.
And there's incredible parallels as well with Gina's story and Lang's story, aren't there?
There are.
Hancock Prospecting is a family business. When Gina was just 2 years old, she was gifted a third of the company's shares. She has lived and breathed it her whole life.
She was just the sort of young teenage girl, I guess, when she came on the scene. She started to learn the business from the ground up. That's where she got her grounding.
But what was the family business and what did it teach her? It was mining and it was also politics.
Yeah, I think she's shaped by her father's politics and by his efforts to battle governments, both state and federal. And I suppose that's something that she's inherited from him. She's also replicated Lang Hancock's methods in terms of supporting politicians that she likes or approves of.
And you said that Gina had a strange view of the political process. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, look, I think it's a sort of a simplistic view of the world, which is not unique to Gina. That is that you can sort of change the course of history by knocking on the right door at the right time with the right message, and everything will work out.
From Guardian Australia, I'm Sarah Martin, and this is Gina, a podcast series about Australia's richest person, Gina Rinehart, who, like her father before her, is no stranger to changing the course of history.
Do you think for people to understand Gina Rinehart, they need to understand Lang Hancock?
Yes, yeah, I think it's a very significant father-daughter relationship.
This is episode 2, Like Father, Like Daughter. There's a really famous story about Lang Hancock, and that is the story of his discovery flight. It's so well known in Western Australia, it's almost folklore. It's 1952. This is 2 years before Gina Rinehart is even born.
The most formidable area to fly over in Western Australia is the Hamersley Ranges. There's no way that you could get down to Perth. except by flying over these ranges.
So the story goes that Lang and his wife Hope are leaving one of their properties in the Pilbara to fly south to Perth. They're flying in this tiny little Oster single-engine aircraft. But there's a huge storm on the horizon.
And that meant the big cumulus clouds were there. Now, in the small aeroplane, there was no way of climbing up through them, so had to go under them. The further we went, the lower they got. The only way out of it was to dive through a gorge, which I did do.
He flies down into the Turner River. Lang looks out of the window and sees the red iron ore rock face.
Because we're down about 25 feet.
He turns to Hope and says,
The walls of this looked to be iron.
Hope says that in response she said, "Oh, is it, honey?"
Next winter I went back, found the same place, and I was able to trace the iron along for about 70 miles. I landed in the Spinifex and walked across, took a couple of samples, and to my surprise, it was also high grade.
This is essentially the foundation story for the House of Hancock and of Lang, the flying prospector who can pick iron ore right from the sky. It's a story that's been told thousands of times by the Hancock family, and it's one that Gina is clearly very proud of.
That day means a lot to Australia. You know, where on earth would we be in this country without the iron ore industry?
The drama of the story, you know, the heroic figures, the big money, the transformation of the Australian economy, these are all big themes in the history of mining.
David Lee is an associate professor at the University of New South Wales. He's written widely on the history of mining in Australia. How important do you see Hancock's role in the development of the Pilbara iron ore industry and subsequently Australia's export economy and resources?
Well, Lang Hancock is very important.
For Lang Hancock, the Discovery flight is just the beginning, because now he has a problem.
How on earth do you do anything with it? First of all, you're not allowed to export it.
First big obstacle is that there's an iron ore embargo that has been in place since 1938, which means that the federal government has said there is no Australian ore to be sold abroad. It was believed in the 40s and 50s that Australia did not have enough accessible iron ore to spare to give foreign countries.
Unofficially, it was put in place because of Japan. War was brewing in the Pacific at the time of the embargo, and Australia didn't want to contribute minerals to the war effort.
There's no way that a private individual could peg out and work the iron, so they would have to rely, as far as the governments were concerned, have to stay in the ground and be of no value to anybody.
He sees the potential economic benefits of this find, but until the embargo is lifted, it's not going to have any value. So he keeps it secret because he doesn't want competitors gazumping his find.
Keeping his secret close to his chest, Lang sets about trying to change the law. He wants to be able to mine and sell the iron ore he claims to have discovered.
He works away, trying to chip away at the embargo to persuade the Menzies government to lift it.
And Lang Hancock could be very persistent.
I mean, he was abrasive and extraordinarily determined and extraordinarily strong self-belief. And people are just holding me back.
Peter Kennedy is a political commentator and a well-known former ABC journalist in Perth.
My first interview with him, in fact, was in Canberra. He was sitting in his jet at the airport.
He knows the ins and outs of WA's political history, and he's also written about it.
If you didn't agree with him, he couldn't understand it. He's sort of, this is what I want, this is how I'm going to get it. And whether he upset people along the way didn't seem to bother him too much.
One of the first things Lang does is align himself with the Liberal Party, and together they try to get the export embargo lifted. Along with intense lobbying of politicians, Lang also works on getting some mining executives from overseas to come to Australia to see the iron ore firsthand in the Pilbara. In 1960, he brings out an American steel executive who then declares the Pilbara to be one of the most massive ore bodies in the world. He says trying to guess how much there is like trying to calculate how much air there is.
That demonstration by an American really makes it real to Australians, many of whom found it hard to believe what they're hearing about the extent of the iron ore discoveries.
And not long after that visit, in 1960, the embargo was relaxed.
People are beginning to realise that with the fact that we've got the world's biggest iron ore region, we've got one of the major deposits of the world.
How influential was Hancock in having that iron ore export ban lifted?
Well, he was part of the team. He'd be pulling all the strings that he possibly could during that time. He was a significant part of the campaign.
Without him, the post-war economic history of Australia may have been very, very different.
And after that, it was on for young and old.
By the colour, you can tell. Here we are.
With the embargo lifted, companies descend on the Pilbara.
This is a beautiful piece here. Very hard. You can feel the weight in your hand.
But Lang is ready. Together with his school friend and business partner Peter Wright, Lang had made sure to secure multiple tenements that were rich with iron ore prospects.
The day the blanket would have been lifted, all we had to do was put the notice papers on the pegs and we would have owned the ground.
And off the back of this, they strike a deal with British mining company Rio Tinto. Rio would build and operate a mine. Hancock and Wright would receive a royalty.
Did she say you could see the mine from up here?
Just work this out, is that way. That mine is still in operation. It's called Mount Tom Price. Well, we could drive down Mine Road and probably drive past the mine site.
Mount Tom Price, the biggest single deposit of high-grade iron ore in the world.
Geologists guess there are at least 100 million tonnes.
Ore body nearly 8 kilometres long, 1.2 kilometres wide.
Enough to supply the whole world at the present rate of use for 140,000 years.
But the remarkable thing about this deal that was struck in 1962 is that it's signed without a sunset clause. For every dollar Rio earned exporting iron from Mount Tom Price, Lang & Wright's company earned 2.5 cents, or a royalty of 2.5%. And Rio exported a lot of iron. We're looking at the side of Mount Tom Price that's been very heavily mined. And I don't know what it looked like before, but you can see that it's kind of the side of the mountain's been mined. It's huge, like it's a huge mine. I think I kind of imagined a little hole in the ground. I don't know, I imagined there wasn't much left, but it's obviously a vast operation.
What were they thinking? What were they thinking when they struck this deal with Hancock and Wright? They need truckloads of, to carry the money.
Mm.
We can only assume that the company people that struck the deal had no idea of the extent of the minerals in that region.
Are you able to sort of help us quantify that at all? Like how much was that deal worth for Hancock while he was alive, and how much did that continue to be worth?
Well, he was recognised when he lived to be one of the richest Australians. It certainly gave him a very substantial personal wealth.
Lang Hancock was about to ride the wave of Australia's first iron ore boom and become the country's most famous prospector in the process.
He's remarkable for many things. One, because he's the richest man in Australia.
Within a decade of the mine starting up, he had made more than $15 million in royalties. The Hancock fortune had arrived.
He doesn't mind waiting.
There's really well-known footage of Lang sitting in his Land Cruiser at a level crossing in the Pilbara, just watching the carriages loaded with iron ore go by.
From each truck in each train that passes his homestead, he receives a royalty of about $20. A total on the year of around $3 million.
I'm very glad I had the opportunity to interview him. I feel as though that was an important public service to do that.
Stuart Reid is an oral history interviewer. He sat down with Lang Hancock to talk about his life and legacy for the National Library. It was near the end of Lang's life.
I had to grit my teeth through much of it, and it was an uncomfortable experience, a difficult interview to do. I did quite a bit of research to form the questions that I used.
There is, of course, a lot to say about the views and attitudes Lang held, which Stuart is talking about here, but we'll be getting to that in a future episode. As it stands, what Lang said in that interview is unable to be published because you need the permission of Gina Rinehart. We requested permission, but were declined.
We did it at his farm, and it's a lovely rolling hills sort of a place, and there's like a summer house, a kind of a standalone room out the back, which is where we did the interviewing, and he'd shuffle out there, and we'd set up out there, and then he'd get impatient. He'd say, "I've got things to do, and we'd wind it up, and his chauffeur, and he would cook the barbecue, but he would do it to Lang's taste, which was that burnt sausages, burnt chops, charred everything, and a bit of salad, and I would very politely eat that."
So for Lang, being a famous prospector wasn't enough. Even though Mount Tom Price was paying him millions of dollars, it wasn't his mine, it was Rio's. What he wanted was a Hancock mine.
It would have been a source of frustration to him that he'd been thwarted, because that's how he saw it. It wasn't any failing on his part. He'd been thwarted by the forces that control Australia.
Gina Rinehart has spent a lot of time railing against the government and regulations and bureaucracy that she believes is holding her back. It's really interesting to look at Lang Hancock at this time and hear him saying many of the same things.
And the Australian government sits back, contributes nothing, takes no risk, and gets 47.5% of the profit.
The state favoured established mining companies because they were experienced and could afford to build the required infrastructure. This meant they were given preferential treatment over Lang and his upstart company.
Your critics on the West Australian government say you're very difficult to deal with, you and your partner. Would you agree with this?
Yes, I certainly would agree with it.
If I asked you sort of the general question, why do you think Lang never got his mine? What would be your answer to that?
Probably because Charlie Court believed that Lang would be in it just to maximise his profit rather than the length of the longevity of the operation.
So the short answer is Charles Court.
Yes, although he has denied that.
Court was Minister for Industrial Development in the Brand Liberal government and would also later become Premier.
You had two bulls in the paddock, I suppose, and they had different points of view.
There's a quote from Charles Court talking about Lang. He says, if he'd had his way, he would have had the whole of the Pilbara and given everybody what he didn't want. That might sound an exaggeration, but it wasn't. That's the attitude he adopted.
Thing that's sometimes difficult to understand about Charlie Court, he did strongly believe that because the resources belonged to the state, that it's the state that should be the beneficiary and the people of the state and the people of the country that should be the beneficiaries.
Lang and Court would butt heads time and time again over the years. It would become a fierce rivalry. But the government wasn't the only thorn in his side. Can you tell us about Lang's decision to start his own newspaper?
Yes. So he was really frustrated at the media coverage. He felt that he was being unsympathetically treated and that he could achieve some social ends that he wanted by influencing public opinion around that free enterprise stuff.
So in 1969, he and his business partner, Peter Wright, decide to do something about it.
They wanted their own outlet to get their message across. They felt the message wasn't getting across in the established media, so they started their own Sunday newspaper.
It's called the Sunday Independent. Is this newspaper sort of rabidly campaigning for the mining sector? What's it doing?
Yeah, it's pretty much supporting his philosophy, it's supporting his entrepreneurial ambitions, and it's critiquing areas where he thinks the state government is stymieing or obstructing the development of his mining vision.
Lang's investment in the Sunday Independent even got to the point where he was using the paper to influence democracy.
So this was Lang's chance to get Charlie out of the way.
By 1971, the rivalry with Charles Court is getting worse, and there's an election that year. Lang decides that he's going to use the Sunday Independent to turn against the Liberal government and campaign for Labor,
which he thinks might be more favourable to his interests.
Certainly the paper attacked the Court government a lot.
He also financially supports Labor and its leader, John Tonkin. And in the end, he wins by a hair.
Okay, so Tonkin wins the 71 election by 1 seat. How influential was Hancock in that outcome?
Well, given it was so close, he has to have played a significant part because it's a very narrow majority, and without Hancock's intervention, it could easily have gone the other way.
Well, there's been a change of government in Western Australia. Now, they mightn't do anything, but at least they won't obstruct.
Do you think Hancock was treated unfairly by the government?
Well, I know he thinks he was treated very unfairly.
So even though he got his preferred premier, the new government treated him no differently to the previous one.
Normally what happens, you go out and peg a lease, you can then go ahead and mine it. But what the state government did was to legislate around that so that effectively ruled out the possibility of him developing it himself, even if he could have got the resources to do so. In that regard, he certainly felt he was unfairly treated.
Lang quite famously responded by saying all politicians are hairy-ass bastards, and he soon walks away from the Independent. So this incredible part of Australia's history, the iron ore boom, the ego clashes, it's all happening around Gina as she's coming of age. She's watched Lang as he's battled state and federal governments to try to get what he wants. It's absolutely central to who she becomes. You only have to look at what she's doing at the time to see that she's right there alongside him.
Mr. Hancock, secession from federal government, it's basically a very serious step. Do you really mean to secede?
I think there's no other alternative. We wish to secede economically from Canberra, not so much from Australia.
Following the newfound riches of the mining boom in the West, there's a renewed push for the state to secede from the Commonwealth.
And there's no other step I don't think that we can take.
Lang bankrolls the new WA secession movement. He sets up an office and he backs a political candidate for the 1974 election. Gina works at the office almost full-time. She talks passionately about the cause. She's quoted in Woman's Day saying that it only takes 20 minutes to convert people to the idea. She also says she travels as secessionist on her passport, which raises a couple of eyebrows. No such career? There is now, she says. Obviously, the movement is unsuccessful and we still count WA as part of Australia. But there's an amazing black and white video from some pub somewhere in WA making fun of the whole thing.
Should we, the guardians of the West, let sappers take command to fleece, despoil and fragmentate our great Australian land. We'll not impair Australia fair, nor the strength of old lands.
There's another quote from Gina in that Woman's Day article. She says, "People say I'm the spitting image of my father in the way I think, and in major things we see eye to eye."
Did you know the team behind the Gina series also make a daily news podcast? It's called Full Story. If you want analysis of the most important stories of the week, then you can find it wherever you're listening to Gina right now. Just search for Full Story.
Michael, you ready to go?
Yes, I am, Sarah.
Perhaps you can just take me back to the start and how you came to know the Hancock family.
Look, I really have to delve into the memory bank to remember myself.
Michael Yabsley was Gina's friend, but it had all started with politics. Because as Gina entered her 20s, the House of Hancock was looking for fresh political connections, and they were looking at university campuses. Michael had made a name for himself, fighting against a hard left takeover of the Australian Union of Students. And then his phone rang.
It was a phone call from Gina.
Do you remember what she said on the phone?
Yeah. She said that she and her father were organising a trip to the Pilbara and would I like to be part of it?
Future Treasurer Peter Costello, Tasmanian Conservative Erica Betts and Victorian power broker Michael Kroger were also tapped on the shoulder.
What was the atmosphere like?
There was great excitement surrounding the trip. It was a real adventure. By this stage, Lang Hancock had certainly made his impact on governments around Australia. I mean, he had emerged as a crusader against big government.
Gina was very young at this point. She was in her early 20s. What was she like? Was she confident? What was she like?
She was very confident. She was very well spoken, but was, very much representing her father, which I'm, sure is indicative of what happened, throughout the rest of his life, even though there were some issues there. But she was hospitable, welcoming.
After that trip, Michael would rise up the ranks in New South Wales politics. He would also become a senior advisor to Gina in the 90s and receive a seat on the company board.
Yeah, look, there were times when we were in frequent contact, and of course, when we were working on a particular project, it might have been on a daily basis. It was interesting when I saw she was doing one of those News Limited or News Corp broadcasts, and she introduced herself as Gina Rinehart, that little voice, mining magnate. And I thought, you shouldn't be calling yourself a mining magnate. That's for others to, it's a bit like saying fabulous business person.
Gina Rinehart is well known for being media shy. She very rarely gives interviews to journalists. Guardian Australia has requested an interview with her, but our request was declined. And there's not a lot of information out there about what it's like to be in her inner circle. Michael Yabsley, however, has been there. He's one of the few people who can talk about what that's like.
The word complex is one word.
Do you want to throw some other words in there, Michael?
Paranoid, but maybe paranoid for a reason, because there are a lot of predators out there, who would love to, get a slice of the action from her business interests. She's ruthless. So, they're three pretty hard-nosed character traits, which I guess the world's most significant mining magnate needs to have.
So I think you've described, and certainly others have, that there's this sort of, you're with me or you're against me mentality.
Yep, absolutely. And look, I wouldn't describe it as a virtue, but, in hard business circles, hard political circles, that's what has allowed a lot of people to survive and do well.
And when you attempted to tell her things that she didn't like or didn't agree with, how did that go?
Generally not well. And it doesn't go well but I think by that stage I was sanguine enough about my own sort of place in that sort of role that I didn't want it to end badly, but it wasn't the end of my world if it did end badly.
Yabsley is quoted in a biography by journalist Adele Ferguson. He says Gina wasn't always an ogre, but more often than not, everything turned nasty or narky. I guess how did things turn nasty or narky? Was it just in the sort of churning through of friends and associates? Or?
Usually when it came time to pay the bill, and that was often a point of stress.
And what did you make of that? Was it frustrating? I mean...
Yeah, of course. But, as I said, it's a trait that is common to a lot of very wealthy people.
Is she stingy?
Yeah, yes. Yeah. And look, I'm sure there's a method in that it puts everyone on notice.
Michael's relationship with Gina ended as suddenly as it had started. In 1998, he said there was an article published in BRW in which he named Hancock Prospecting as a client.
And Gina saw that as a major breach of confidentiality. Obviously, I didn't, because it was pretty public that you can't do that sort of work and expect, a secret squirrel, no one will know. And that's what precipitated the parting of the ways. She pulled the pin on the relationship with the business, and our offices were packed up, and that was the end of the relationship. From memory, there was a letter or something in writing to say that the relationship is over. I bumped into her in Parliament House one night, and we had a brief and pleasant chat. We've exchanged correspondence a couple of times about relatively inconsequential matters, but apart from that, there's been no resumption of the association.
How did you feel about that, given you had described her as a friend?
I was gutted. I was regretful that the friendship went out the window with the commercial relationship. She will cut you off, and that was my experience.
For all the time that Michael Yabsley knew Gina Rinehart and beyond their falling out, this is the reputation she developed. A ruthless and successful business leader, albeit one who was intensely private. Gina Rinehart was known to shun publicity, to avoid the media spotlight. And although there would be many turbulent events that would attract the public eye over the years, it was for the most part about her private life. It was the fierce family court battles that would dominate headlines. Many of those events we'll look at in the next episode of Gina, episode 3. But the Gina that we know today, the Gina Rinehart who champions Trump, who hosts national mining events and who is publicly outspoken on policy, it's easy to forget that version of Gina Rinehart didn't exist for a long time. Until the right fight came along.
Well, I'm Kevin, I'm from Queensland and I'm here to help.
It was the Kevin Rudd era.
That I will be a Prime Minister for all Australians.
And look, I have to say, the campaign around the whole idea of Kevin 07, it really took off, especially amongst young people. My nieces and nephews were ringing me could I get them a T-shirt with Kevin 07 on it or a singlet?
In 2007, Sharon Jackson was the federal Labor MP for the seat of Hasluck in Perth.
Kevin had a lovely, as they always do, politicians, a 10-point plan, one of which was action on climate change. So it was an exciting time.
Following Rudd's landslide victory, there was a huge amount of enthusiasm for his new government. There was something called the Australia 2020 Summit, when thousands of people descended on Canberra for what was basically a national brainstorming session. One of the most important things to come out of that was the announcement of a root and branch review of Australia's taxation system. It was called the Henry Review.
So you want me to do this as part of the introduction, right?
Yeah. Maybe just say my name is Ken Henry, former Treasury Secretary, blah, blah, blah.
Ken Henry, former Treasury Secretary. and I'm the person who was given the opportunity to lead the review of the Australian taxation system through 2008, 2009 that was published in early 2010.
So I guess tell us when you were first tasked with this project and what your mandate was.
There was this view that if you had enough money to be able to more than compensate all of the losers, then it must be feasible to do something truly imaginative. And so this was their idea. Their idea was that Australia should seize this opportunity to do something truly imaginative.
Ken's idea was a recommendation of a tax on resources, such as iron ore, called the Resource Super Profits Tax. It was known as the RSPT. The idea boiled down to a 40% tax on a company's super profits.
Okay, so a super profit arises when the profit that goes to the investors is above and beyond what they would have needed to receive in order to make the investment.
And what sort of profits were they making?
Let's say high double digits, shall we? Very large profits.
So it would have been a very small amount of skin off their nose.
Very small.
I think part of the problem with the tax was it also wasn't easy to explain to people. And because it had a headline figure of 40%, it already seemed like it was a little bit extraordinary. And of course also the profits of mining companies are always in the billions. And I think the figures just were, explicable. So personally, I found it very hard to explain. If I said to people that these are our resources and we as community members should get some benefit in public infrastructure from the profits they make, no argument, people agreed. It was when they got down into the weeds, well, people didn't get down into the weeds. The only people who did was the mining industry.
Unsurprisingly, the mining industry don't like the idea of a new tax on their super profits. And so they stock their war chest and go on the attack. Do you remember being surprised by the ferocity of it once it got going?
Well, yes, I was surprised by the ferocity of it, but I was even more surprised by the impact that it had. Like, of course you would expect the miners to arc up. We were taking cash from them.
This time the mining companies of Australia got used to the idea that they need to return a fairer share to all Australians.
They decide to launch an ad campaign. Its key slogan is "Keep Mining Strong."
It's a war for the support of voters.
Tomorrow, the mining lobby will start a nationwide advertising blitz, which claims the new tax will increase the cost of living and hurt retirees' investments.
With new advertisements arguing the tax will affect every Australian.
It was the most expensive advertising campaign that had ever been run in Australian history. It wasn't a knee-jerk reaction. They had this ready. It was incredibly well funded and it was beautifully written.
Dee Madigan is creative director of ad agency Campaign Edge. She's also worked on more than 20 Labor campaigns.
It was about making people think that mining is very much a part of the Australian community. They got a doctor in a mining ad talking about, the fact that they're paid for these neonatal units. So it was, what this did was absolutely get you on your heartstrings and make you like these people. And it is very hard then to support a campaign that these people tell you, is going to hurt them if you like them.
This is obviously really interesting when you come to the context of the mining industry's campaign against the RSPT, because they had doctors in the ads. They had, it was like they got the coffee shop down the street. Like everyone was going to be affected by this.
Yeah, you know what was happening to the coffee shop down the street? The barista had gone off to drive a grader on a dirt road somewhere adjacent to a mining development, so there was no longer any coffee shop down the street. That's what was happening. I remember the Minerals Council, every 12 months they'd come to Canberra and I'd go and talk to them. This is before the tax review, right? And they'd tell me stories about a bit worried about, these grader drivers. We're paying them $150,000. These are school teachers and nurses that we're putting on these graders. But then once the mining tax was announced, it was all completely different. No. They were providing jobs for teachers and nurses and baristas and so on. Extraordinary feat of propaganda.
Under pressure on multiple fronts, the wheels of Kevin Rudd's government are beginning to fall off. In June, he arrives at Perth to speak at the press club. For some reason, he decides to walk the long way in.
Mr. Prime Minister, would you guarantee no one will lose their jobs?
Just outside the event is a huge protest, people in high-vis heckling the Prime Minister. They're led by a surprising figure on the back of a flatbed truck.
And what are we going to tell those jittery Labor MPs in marginal seats?
It's Gina Rinehart wearing a string of pearls.
Axe the tax!
Axe the tax!
She was joined by Fortescue's Andrew Forrest, known as Twiggy.
It was Gina Rinehart as you've never seen the mining magnate before.
And what does our Premier say? And Kerry, please listen. What should our West Australian newspaper be saying? Axe the tax!
My reaction was, oh, for heaven's sake, it was so un-Gina Rinehart-like. But then I think the next reaction was, these are the wealthiest people in the country and they are not going to take this lying down.
Was that the first time you'd seen her? Obviously the first time you'd seen her on the back of a flatbed truck, but was it the first time you'd seen her really publicly lobby in that way?
Absolutely. And Gina had always been a significant figure in industry. But I think it was that mining campaign really created the political lobbyist, if you want, out of her.
I guess a Prime Minister under incredible pressure at the time, harassed on his way to give a speech. It sort of amplified the pressure the government was under at the time.
Yeah, and often with things like that, it's actually a strategy to destabilise, and particularly with some politicians who've got thin skins. Sometimes before any kind of performance or debate and that, anything that shakes them up a little bit is a tactic that people use to see if you can get them to turn around and respond and to feel like they're a little bit out of control.
The rally was in early June. By the end of the month, Kevin Rudd has been rolled as Prime Minister. I remember covering politics at the time, and it was just such an extraordinary moment in Australian political history. It's hard to describe the intensity of that moment when this historical thing had happened, when a sitting Prime Minister had been rolled by his own party. I mean, it also, it precipitated the most turbulent time in the Labor Party's history that anyone could remember.
What a difference a Prime Minister makes. In her 8th day in office, Julia Gillard has called time on a bitter 2-month battle with the giants of Australia's mining industry. The government has abandoned its super profits tax and come up with a new watered-down minerals tax.
Together, we have achieved a breakthrough that keeps faith with the government's central policy goal.
Every Australian depends on the welfare of the Australian mining industry, and I think business generally around Australia will be sighing a great deal of relief this morning.
A few months later, Julia Gillard barely clings onto power at the federal election. In the seat of Hasluck, Sharon Jackson is ousted.
The saddest thing about the RPT is not only did we ignore that pile of money for the community, we let individuals essentially take it up.
When the watered-down RSPT became the Minerals Resource Rent Tax, what was your feeling at that point?
My feeling at that point was we'd be better off just walking away, that this is really a bit of a joke of a tax. We might as well have said at the time, yeah, okay, you won and we lost.
So they had a comprehensive victory.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, they did. And you'd have to say that right now they still look like absolute victors. You know, they're still got the gold medal hanging around their necks. There's no question about that. But I think the gold is a bit tarnished as well.
How often since 2010 have you heard people say, "Ooh, they might run another mining tax scare campaign"?
Oh, look, there is no doubt it sits in the memories of politicians and it makes them nervous.
Do you think that campaign that was waged against the RSPT has cruelled any chance of the mining sector ever paying more on the profits of Australia's resources?
I think so, unless someone actually gets smart and understands that if we combine this sort of, if we're going to transition our economy to something that's going to leave a viable planet over the next 50 years, then things have to change. And, I try not to get too depressed because you've got to keep hope alive. If you don't have hope, what have you got?
Even though it was the most expensive advertising campaign ever seen in Australia, the amount spent barely made a dent in the lobby's war chest. It's estimated they had $90 million set aside remaining to spend if need be. The lost billions that could have flowed to general revenue if the RSPT had gone ahead. I know it's been variously quantified in the years since. What would it have meant to the rest of the Australian economy?
The thing is that the impact that it would have had on the economy goes well beyond the addition to budget revenue. It would have taken some pressure out of the economy. We would have had lower interest rates. We would have had a more competitive exchange rate. We would have had fewer jobs lost in the manufacturing sector and so on. We would have had all those benefits as well that are on top of the revenue coming into the budget. But certainly we would be handing on to future generations of Australians a much smaller sum of public debt. There's no question about that.
This whole saga is really a watershed moment in Gina's life. It's the emergence of the woman we know today.
I'm happy to be speaking with you about the potential for progress, investment and growth in what is one of my favourite parts of our country, the North.
It's during this time that she sets up a new political lobby group to push for the development of a tax-free haven in Australia's north, where her mines are.
To reduce red tape, decrease government costs.
She also takes up a regular column for a mining magazine. She faces a barrage of criticism for one of her pieces.
Richest Women has a message for everyone who has a beef with the rich.
She says that if people are jealous of the wealthy, they shouldn't just sit there and complain, but do something to make money themselves.
Stop boozing, stop smoking and start working harder. Well, as you can imagine, it really did hit a nerve.
She suggests lowering the minimum wage and cutting taxes to stimulate employment. She starts promoting the views of well-known climate change skeptics like Lord Monckton and Ian Plimer, who are now in her inner circle.
The mining magnate funded Lord Monckton's controversial university appearance overnight, despite academic opposition.
Lord Monckton is a hoax. Climate change is not a joke.
And at one point, she even writes a poem. It's an ode to industry.
Our Future by Gina Rinehart. The globe is sadly groaning with debt, poverty and strife, and billions now pleading to enjoy a better life. Their hope lies with resources buried deep within the earth and the enterprise and capital which give each project worth.
She has it engraved onto a giant boulder of iron ore that sits outside a mall in Perth. It comes from one of her mines.
Our nation needs special economic zones and wiser government before it is too late.
And then the most notable other thing she does during this time is take another leaf out of the Lang Hancock playbook. She tries to enter the media. But what did she want from those investments?
I think she wanted to be known as a media proprietor, but she also wanted to see favourable content going to air.
So effectively it's about influence.
Yes, yeah, and being seen to have that influence.
I mean, it's interesting because, obviously Lang had tried a similar thing with The Independent.
Yes.
Late in 2010, Gina starts buying shares. First, she buys into Network 10, purchasing a 10% stake. 4 days later, she takes a seat on the board. Conservative commentator Andrew Bolt, a friend of Gina's who would soon get his own show on the network, said at the time that Rinehart is on a mission. Channel 10 is just the vehicle. Another close friend, John McRobert, gives some insight into what that mission might be. He said, Gina is deeply concerned about this country and the way it's going, and she wants to have a voice somehow. Next, she buys a small stake in Fairfax, the publisher of the Sydney Morning Herald and The Age. By 2012, that stake is up to almost a fifth of the company. She's now the company's biggest shareholder.
Mrs. Rinehart doesn't have a seat on the Fairfax board yet, but is demanding 3.
Directors usually have to sign the paper's long-standing charter of editorial independence. But Gina flatly refuses to do so. She says it should be optional.
That has protected the assets of Fairfax. It has protected the readers, it's protected the community, and it's also protected the journalists. And that is now what is under direct challenge by Mrs. Rinehart.
Then she would be able to set the editorial direction of the company and presumably set aside that charter of editorial independence.
By 2013, it's been reported that Gina is considering a full takeover of Fairfax. But that takeover would never happen. And in 2015, Gina retreats.
And she was sort of out of those arrangements as quickly as she got into them.
Hancock Prospecting sell their entire stake, quoting a series of bad decisions made by the leadership team of Fairfax and declining credibility in the mastheads as the reason. But Gina's media dreams didn't end there, and she still has plays in the media today. She's a key financial backer of Seven West Media's digital newspaper, The Nightly, although the amount of her investment is not known. The Nightly has published first-person pieces written by Gina Rinehart. Can I ask what you think of Gina Rinehart?
She's a very wealthy person. That's all I think of her.
Do you think she's influential?
She's clearly influential. Yeah.
And she's obviously cultivating Peter Dutton very closely and has been doing so quite transparently since he became opposition leader. Does it concern you the influence Australia's wealthiest person could have over a coalition government?
I would just want to answer it in a general way and say that it's incredibly important that our national leaders ensure that this does not happen. It's incredibly important that the country's leaders ensure that they're leading the country in the national interest and not in the interests of a particular person or even a particular sector. It's fundamental.
And why is that so fundamental, Ken?
When a particular interest is being looked after, it's invariably the case, like it always happens, that the rest suffers.
Does it sadden you when you look at the lack of reform that's been achieved in the 21st century?
Oh, I'm beyond sad. Yeah, I mean, of course it does. And at times, obviously, and you won't be surprised to hear me say this, at times I feel, deep frustration, even anger. I try not to be angry about it, but some of what's happening is quite brazen. It is quite brazen. Anyway, I think I think we've lost it. I really do. And we have to refine the ability to chart a sensible course and not allow ourselves to be intimidated by vested interest.
Wow. Look at it. a big rock. The 30-tonne boulder inscribed with Gina's ode to industry still stands in suburban Perth at the Coventry Village shopping centre. It's a relic of this time in Gina's life.
Where's the poem?
Well, there's a bolt, a little bolt from where it used to sit. It's very sad that the Gina poem hasn't been maintained, the poem rock. Sadly, the poem is no longer there. It's either been stolen or has fallen off. All that's left are a couple of twisted bolts. Now it's just a huge boulder without any meaning. Unless you know what you're looking for. We think this is Gina Rinehart's poem rock.
Oh, okay.
But you don't remember seeing it? Do you know about this rock?
No, I don't know anything about it.
Are you locals here?
Yeah.
Do you know about this rock?
No. Oh, yeah, he would. What? That's something to do with the markets that was here before, wasn't it? This rock? Oh, okay. I thought it was.
Guardian Australia contacted Peter Dutton for comment, but did not receive a response. We also contacted Hancock Prospecting, but did not receive a substantive response. Gina is recorded on Parramac and Kaurna country. It's reported by me, Sarah Martin, and the series producer is Joe Koning. The executive producer is Shelley Hepworth, and Miles Martignoni is the head of audio. This episode was also produced by Jess Hamilton. Additional production by Isabella Lee and Luca Itamani, who assisted with research. Sound design in this episode was by Joe Koning.